Hello, I'm Rosemary Moon. I'm a cookery writer, and you're far more likely to come across me surrounded by food, perhaps giving a demonstration, than making a presentation like this. This is just a small representation of the wonderful things that are available from our local producers. And I just want to say it's really great that OREF have included food in this session on consumption, because the carbon footprinting expert Mike Berners-Lee has said in his much acclaimed book, How Bad Are Bananas?, that food and drink actually account for 25% of the average person's carbon footprint per annum. Now, I don't think there is an average person really, and I'm sure whatever happens in Orkney is very different from elsewhere. But if we take that figure of 25%, 23% of that is getting our food to our homes, and 2% is eating out. So there are huge savings to be made, but those savings have to be identified and they have to be clear goals. And there's lots of information coming out now from new reports as to how that can be achieved, or where it might be achieved, and we will try to attach a very good infographic to the end of this presentation that will, I hope, illustrate it. But post-COVID, obviously, we've seen how the sector here or how the economy here in Orkney has really suffered through the lack of tourism. So with food and drink being a real banner part of our offer to people coming here, to those who live here, and also for trading, which, let's face it, Orcadians have done since time immemorial. I think it's really important that we look at how we can improve things for ourselves, not only in terms of freshness and taste, which of course are the things that matter to me, but also in terms of closing our economy, closing the circle of our food economy, and keeping the profit, or more of the profit, local here in Orkney from food, drink and agriculture. Now, I'm not the only person banging the drum for this. Ewan Smith at Business Gateway has been working during these quiet times with Gareth Davis from Aquaterra on doing some number crunching across all sorts of areas. But they've come up with the concept that a cow raised on Orkney and sold here either for finishing south, or perhaps even just for slaughter and then processing south, out of the total retail value of that cow, maybe only a third of it remains here on Orkney, and the farmer who sold that cow will tell you that that's not all profit, and the very small amount of that will be profit. But even if that cow is sold on to a supermarket and is then processed, and some of that comes back to Orkney for sale, two-thirds of the retail price of that animal will be going elsewhere, will be spent elsewhere. A local abattoir is absolutely essential for resilience here on the islands. Okay, it won't be processing all the animals that are raised here, but it will give us more control over what is happening. Orkney, as has doubtless already been said, is aiming to reach carbon neutral by 2030, so huge changes have got to be made in our food system. But we don't yet have the facts to know what we can do to change, what needs to be changed, and indeed what we can build our vision on. There are some great things happening. I mean, we have a world-leading aquaculture sector. Some of our products, like these incredible Orkney craft vinegars, are being raved about far and wide, and you don't need me to tell you about Highland Park and Scappa's export potential, export out with islands and then further beyond. And of course, lots and lots of people are looking to market abroad out with islands. But what can we do about actually keeping value here? The Westray Community Garden Project is something that really catches my eye, and located between the Pirrawall Hotel and the shops up the road is this growing area with polytunnels and also an outdoor veg area, and they are doing a fantastic job at cropping to the shop. And of course things like strawberries and raspberries are very, very popular, and it is these sort of things that can really make a difference when we look at seasonality, because we do need to move to a more seasonal diet. In Mike Berners-Lee's recommendations as to how we can cut down on the carbon footprint of our food industry, one of the things, or the food industry generally, one of the things that he's saying is that we must cut down reliance on air-freighted foods. So that would be things like mange tout, grapes ready to eat from other countries, but things like melons, yes, this is not a local melon, and indeed apples and oranges, etc., can come by sea, so their carbon footprint is much less. And Orkney has always traded, and we need to trade. But what would a locavore diet look like? A trendy word perhaps for somebody who eats local food. How much would we have to change to enable us to truly eat the view, which is one of the best marketing slogans for local food systems that I think I have ever come across in 20 years of looking at a more sustainable local food economy? How much difference is refilling the bottles that Shearer's making to Crantit Dairy, and the amount of plastic waste that is involved in their system? Now, in order to answer these questions, I believe that we need to do a food mapping project here in Orkney to find out exactly what we have. So I believe we need to know all sorts of answers to the questions about things like, are our local chippies using local fish? Do they use local tatties for their chips? And the only way to find that out is to do a structured food mapping project. And it can be done with volunteers, with the right resources, and perhaps with some funding. And from that information, we will have the facts to deliver to the policymakers to build a more resilient and more delicious food economy for our islands. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
So, hello everybody. I am going to be doing this talk about zero waste shopping. I'm proud to be Adele Liverdale, the owner and founder of Orkney's first zero waste shop. Let's see if it lets me change these slides. So, Eco Orkney, goods that do good. That's me out west, found a greenie sign, of course. So, my husband tells me that I had a conversation with him last summer about wanting to open an eco shop or a zero waste shop, just basically because we didn't have one here in Orkney. And yeah, I had a little bit of a internal discussion with myself about selling people things, because I think that's part of the problem of where we are today. And that really, so I started to kind of view marketing research, because it's really not my background. My background is in sustainable development. And they're always, when you attend any marketing conferences, when you Google any kind of marketing tips, it's how can you solve your customers' problems? So Eco Orkney began when I started to think about what is the problem? What is the problem? Pollution, particularly plastic pollution for Eco Orkney. So plastic, only 9% of it is recycled globally now, and 12% of that's incinerated. So we have over 70% that's still out into the environment. The thing about plastic as well is that half of all plastics ever made were done so in the last 15 years. There is over 448 million tonnes of plastic out in the world. Again, only 9% of that is recycled. And it's easily Googleable that oil companies, their oil income has gone down, and as a result they are increasing their plastic production, so that 448 million tonnes is set to double by 2050. So let's stop using plastic. Not only is it plastic pollution, but we have particulate pollution from shipping goods around the world. We have chemical spills from, lots of different formulations in different kind of everyday goods that we use, cleaning, shampoos, soaps, etc. Overconsumption, I think, is a large problem. So 12% of the world's population lives in America and Western Europe, and we account for 60% of all spending. If you look up the story of stuff on YouTube, it's absolutely brilliant for simply describing this problem. In America, 96% of purchases are in the bin well within the first 12 months of purchasing them. So you don't need to buy that stuff because you're not even using it. Deforestation, so palm oil is the big one. It's used in a lot of cosmetics particularly. This kind of stuff happens because we want a glittery lipstick, which is absolutely crazy. But roughly the area of 30 football pitches is deforested, and it's tropical hardwood as well. So 30 football pitches every minute. And it also affects the wider chain, so 13.2 million people are involved in forestry jobs, and there's 40 million worldwide who are affected by this loss of habitat, not to mention the impact that it has in absorbing CO2 and protecting biodiversity. We have a problem as well with exploitation and slavery, and this makes people very uncomfortable, but it's the truth. It particularly affects women and children, and 46 million people worldwide are estimated to be exploited. Particular industries that are affected by this problem of using forced labour is tea, coffee, sugar and cocoa. So we have ethically sourced versions of those in the shop as well. And then also it's climate change. There is no planet B. This is our shot to do the world good. So Earth Overshoot Day is a really helpful metric just to kind of overview. So you can see here, this is like the proportion of time. So you've got the years and how our use of resources has increased over time. And basically, we are using far more resources than we have, basically. So this year, August the 1st, from that date on, we're on borrowed time, basically. So we've gone from 1 Earth's worth, which is where we need to be, to 1.75, and it's worse. I think one thing to consider with Earth Overshoot Day, there is an IPAC calculation that basically it's not created equally. So we can see here that less developed nations have they've got a far lesser impact on this use of resources than, oil producing nations, Western nations here as well. So it's not created equally. Access to technology, disposable income, are key considerations in that as well. So we're not all created equal. We shouldn't be treated necessarily all the same. And people who, we know this as well, people who are in developing nations tend to make the things that we use and also tend to be the worst affected by climate change, by pollution, by all of these issues that we discussed, plastic pollution, deforestation, etc. So it's totally unequal, which we already know, but part of the work that I do through Eco Orkney is highlighting these issues, the social issues, helping to create that chain of accountability, who's delivering your goods, where they come from, how are they treated throughout the whole process of the buy and sell exchange. And lots of the goods we sell in Eco Orkney highlight those issues and help farmers, help the supply chain to to have a better share, a better slice of the pie. So I decided to start with £100 worth of bamboo toothbrushes, which seems like a lot of toothbrushes, but that was my first product, the Truth Brush. It's fully sustainable, it uses bamboo, these bristles biodegrade, so that's where I started. And then I feel like one of the issues I was trying to address when I started Eco Orkney was that there's this sense of helplessness out in the community. So I just quite like to highlight, how we can help with these problems. What is it that you need? I focus on essential everyday items: toothbrushes, soap, hair care, body care. Also, like I mentioned, tea, coffee, sugar, those types of things, because really they're some of the most unequal things in the world. What will it leave behind? All our packaging is biodegradable at the least, reusable where we can, even to the sellotape. It's all biodegradable, and I like to do it in the home compost because we don't have industrial composting where I'm from. Where did it come from? I have case studies up here. And who made it? Who picked it? Putting a human face to these things makes you really think more about, buying that thing in the first place. And I think it's really important that we reconnect to that, because it's a marketing strategy to disconnect the purchaser from the story of the goods as well. It's uncomfortable, but that's fine. There's loads of eco shops out there now that are addressing this. Loads of companies that are starting to address it. And yeah, what I would urge you to do is, if you're not sure, ask, because if it's a company that's eco, that's there to do good, they will be dying to tell you how good the products are, what that supply chain is, what the impact is all the way through. I really love Tony's chocolate here. So they are very much about anti-slavery, particularly child labour in picking the cocoa beans, and they produce an annual report every single year and publish it. And yeah, they're just really open and honest about what they've been able to achieve, what they haven't been able to achieve, and still highlighting those issues that still exist in the supply chain. I did a lovely Meet the Maker. This is Kerry, who makes bamboo scrubbies that replace your plastic sponges, and she has got a wonderful story of how quickly people's lives can change when you think that you're settled. So if you look up Eco Orkney on YouTube, you can watch that case study or have it in a headphone while you're going about your day. And just really it gives you an insight into the kind of thought processes that some of our makers go through to really address social and environmental problems. Tony's, like I mentioned before. Sendero, so they work directly with coffee producers across a few developing nations, and they also own and run a social enterprise coffee shop in London to help with some kind of homegrown social issues like employment, employability mainly is that one. Green Fibres, so they make organic cotton, face cloths, towels, all the kind of soft furnishings that you would have in your home. They don't use pesticides, they grow organic fibres, they've been doing it since the early 90s. They are registered with the Soil Association, so it's starting to build this trail of accountability, to develop standards, to develop best practice. And from that, lots of research has been done about what's the best fibre to use, kind of pesticide content, use of water, and how that changes depending on where you're growing the crop. So say Bangladesh compared to the USA. So lots of great studies have come forward because somebody decided that it was important enough to talk about. And then myself, Eco Orkney. So we live on an island, we have to deliver stuff here. We're not quite there with decarbonising the transport chain yet. So I decided that I would offset some of the carbon emissions to make up for the deliveries that I can't do, which the ones that I do myself are carbon neutral, it's foot, bike or on my electric vehicle. So every order that's over £15, the customer is invited to plant a tree. And you can see here it's slightly higher than this now, but we've planted 73 trees, and it's lots of different projects, some for forestry for food consumption. Sometimes it's CO2, sometimes it's kind of redeveloping mangroves as well, and it just lets us know how much CO2 we've saved per year, where the projects are and what kind of issues that they're addressing. And yeah, that's it from Eco Orkney. So you can check out ecoorkney.com. I have Facebook, Instagram, and now YouTube as well. And you can always directly email me. And I had a very short time, so it's just a real whistle-stop tour of some of the issues that I'm trying to address with Eco Orkney, the ethos behind why I started it, and just to say that I'm really proud to be Orkney's first zero waste shop owner.
Hi, my name's Steve Sankey and I work in the tourism sector as a wildlife tour guide. Our 300,000 plus visitors each year inject around £70 million into our economy, so it's really important that we include our tourist sector as we work towards genuine sustainability. A senior executive in the New Zealand Tourist Board once told me in the 90s that there was nothing sustainable about flying tourists halfway around the world, and this neatly summarises the problem we have with sustainable tourism in Orkney. Every single tourist has a relatively high carbon footprint on arrival and departure. So anyone flying in from London, for example, where much of my market lies, will expend around half a tonne of CO2, or roughly 100 kilos if flying in from Aberdeen. If arriving by boat from Aberdeen or Scrabster, a tourist will emit up to 50,000 tonnes of CO2, or 2,000 tonnes if on the Alfred, or somewhere between 14 to 89 kilos of CO2 per passenger. These are staggering data, and imagine therefore the totals of CO2 that as many as 500,000 visitors each year might add to Orkney, irrespective of whether they arrive by air, ferry or cruise. Let's next add in the tourist accommodation, the carbon equation. Around 150,000 visitors each year need some kind of roof. There are about 500 plus providers of accommodation in Orkney, and what their total carbon footprint is anybody's guess. Another audit is required. Obviously their carbon footprint will vary by accommodation type, but to re-emphasise this introduction, every tourist has a high carbon footprint on their way in and out, and will also leave a carbon footprint whilst they're here. So if we're to have a truly sustainable tourism sector, we'll need decisive actions, and I'd like to make some basic suggestions as to what can be done about this greening of tourism. First, all our vessels, either external or internal, should be replaced ASAP with electric, hydrogen or hybrids. Such has already been done on the west coast of Norway. Northlink services the Hamnavo overnight with renewable power, which not only saves 500 tonnes of fuel, but the resultant emissions and £160,000 a year. Pentland Ferries in the Alfred has just won a Green Tourism Award for their host of initiatives, including carbon reductions. In our skies, the proposed Loganair ATR 72s should cut carbon emissions by half, but they should also immediately encourage all passengers to offset their CO2 through tree planting schemes, and then move swiftly on by means of R&D to electrify their fleet like Airbus. Good progress has already been made on the smaller inter-island planes, and Orkney will feature shortly in experiments regarding electrifying inter-island flights. Cruise as an international industry is much more difficult to influence and steer, and it really needs a separate talk and focus, especially post-COVID. There are a few examples of green cruise vessels around at present and more on the way, but in general this industry has a poor reputation regarding its treatment of waste and its use of low-grade fuel and resultant emissions. Recently, the Cruise Lines International Association agreed to a 40% cut in carbon emissions across the fleet by 2030 by means of a greater use of LNG and exhaust cleaning systems. And very positively, through harbour fees, cruise vessels contribute up to £3 million to the annual budget of OIC, and it's very important for our retail and employment sectors, or it was. COVID may change all that. And in any event, even if cruise rises from the dead, Orkney can't solve the cruise industry alone. It needs help from other ports. Obvious fixes include differential price regimes for greener vessels and the use of mandatory renewable energy or shore power whilst in port. All of these transport actions, if implemented, will mean that all tourists arriving in Orkney get off to a good low carbon start. Once here, tourists find that many of our key tourist sites are remote and not necessarily connected by public transport, for example, to Tomb of the Eagles. Volume and other tourists from cruise or elsewhere should be conveyed around the county in either electric, hydrogen or hybrid buses. This isn't difficult and the technology already exists. On a personal note, I've just replaced my diesel minibus with an electric 7-seater. Other obvious fixes include the fact that the hire car sector is currently 100% ICE, so switch to EVs please, and our active travel initiatives such as cycleways are extremely poor and circular walking routes are rare. Slow tourism is a relatively new concept, but how do we accommodate this idea moving forward in Orkney? The accommodation sector also badly needs to improve its efforts rapidly. The organisation Green Tourism exists to help this process, but has only 19 members in Orkney at present, which is shockingly low. Every accommodation provider and tourist business should conduct a green audit immediately and strive to help out with lowering its carbon footprint to target a carbon neutral status. Accommodation actions could revolve around very many issues such as abandoning SU plastics, use of eco-products, provision of EV chargers and hire cars, renewable heating and 1,001 other things that individual businesses can identify as appropriate to them. The carbon audit is vital, and my business has a climate change emergency plan, has yours. I'd be very interested in your ideas and discussion.